Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Difficult Conversations by Supply the Why. I want to apologize. I know we start right at 7 on the button, but there was a technical difficulty or two that I needed to work through. So here we are, starting a little bit late. So it doesn't change the great conversation and the great content that we have on deck for you tonight. So, as promised, we have two great gentlemen here to talk about fatherhood and all the different aspects of it and the pros and cons of being an active father in that sometimes you are the provider, you are the role model, which sometimes means that you have to do a lot of the difficult parts as far as maybe not being there, financial sacrifices, and so much more. So to talk about that tonight, I'm going to bring on difficult conversationalist newcomer Dr. Demetrice Phillips. Dr. Phillips, what's happening?
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. And your first time on the show. I know that you've checked out some of our content. You've been an active participant. So thank you. Tell me a little. Tell everybody a little bit about why are you the person to talk about this subject with everybody?
Man, it's such an important topic for myself. As a father of five children, three boys and two girls, fatherhood got me. And it continues to kind of teach me new lessons as I go along. But it wasn't always like that. When I first had our oldest daughter, Sayera, it scared me being a new father. So created a company off of it, established in 2017 to really talk about what you're doing, difficult conversations, but difficult conversation as it relates to fatherhood.
What's
Because
the company called?
it's called Dad's Doing It.
Okay.
Dad's Doing It established in 2017, and it's about connecting fathers in around the conversation of fatherhood. Because as we know, there's no best practices in fatherhood. We kind of learn as we go. So why not create a community of fathers who are trying to do the same thing? So that's all of it. That's all it's about, starting a conversation around these important topics.
All right. Well, speaking of fathers and community, let's bring on everybody's favorite panelist and longtime guest panelist, Mike Powell. Mike, what's happening, brother?
Good to be back, Dean. Good to be back as always.
Well, it's great. It's great having you back. So, this is something you and I we've talked about this. We've touched upon it in several different episodes. I'm hoping with Dr. Phillips here tonight, we'll be able to look at it from a little bit different point of view and be able to really build upon what we've talked about before and really put a nice platform out there for people to be able to pull different information from and be able to talk about Demetrice, his new platform of Dad's Doing It. All right. So without further ado, fellas, I want to jump right into the clip if we could.
Perfect.
Right, and then we'll go from there. So stand by.
Talk about African American men and how this movie speaks to them.
Pain is passed down from father to son and son to son. A lot of pain in Troy's life is a result of the pain and the damage from his father that he then visits on his son. We have to, as black men, be mindful of that. Sometimes it's unfair, and sometimes we take it out on those we love. And I'm guilty of that frustration that we all have. But we have a responsibility and a duty to be fathers, not to just make babies, but to be real fathers. And you can't expect any good to come to you if you don't visit any good on your son or your daughter. So, be a man.
It's a powerful clip.
Very powerful.
All right. So Demetrice, why don't you start off? Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that clip moves you and why it's so powerful to you?
Man, like Mike and I were talking about this prior. Anything coming from Denzel is easy to get moved, but specifically the words that he chose, and it's hard because I look at my own journey with fatherhood, and as many lessons as I try to teach my kids, and especially right now my son, it's hard not to also pass down that frustration as well. How do we get a message out there to our kids when we see them doing something without voicing that frustration that goes along with that message? So when Denzel talked about that, that clip just moved me. The words that he chose to use and just the stance on that just got me. It resonated with me.
All right, Mike, what say you?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of Dr. D. I mean, the message that he had behind there, Denzel had was powerful, and it spoke to my soul because just based upon myself as the way I grew up, with two brothers and a father who tried to provide for three grown boys. I saw the struggles that he went through, and I saw that everything he tried to do to provide for us, to give us the best opportunity going forward. And so I take some of what my father taught me, and I try to plant seeds and have that grow and to be better than what my father passed on to me, and that's what I want to be able to pass on to my son. So his message again touched my soul.
It's interesting, Mike, because when I had great, I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandparents did a phenomenal job. You know what I'm saying? And I had some really good role models along the way, but my relationship with my dad wasn't really the strongest, and I craved that, right? As an adolescent, as a juvenile, as a young man, like I craved that, that relationship. So that's what I'm trying to do for my kids, because it's funny. I look at my kids and they also want that relationship, And right now we're having fun. Like I say, being a dad is the best job out there. I've had the luxury of having a few different titles, but man, dad is the best one. It really is.
So if I could just add my 2 cents in that clip, I've seen it a few different times, and it seems like every time I watch it, it hits me a little different, depending on the mood, depending on what I have going on in my life, right? So I would say that last time that we just went through that just there, the be a man piece really jumps out at me.
Yeah.
And the reason why that resonates with me so much is being in law enforcement and doing what we do and seeing some of the things we see so many people that that are just not there for their kids.
Yeah.
And we see the ripple effects of it, because a lot of times kids that aren't getting what they need at home, kids that don't live in homes that have any kind of structure, they end up becoming clients of ours.
I also look at it too, it's like, it's funny, you bring up CJ and, the profession that we do. And I think a father provides balance for a family, and that balance equates to discipline, hopefully. And, undisciplined children grow up to be undisciplined men. Undisciplined men grow up to either find themselves in bad situations, jail, prison, hospital, graveyard, So I think from an active perspective for a father, you provide that balance, that I think kids so desperately, especially young boys, need that balance,
So let's talk. So since you went down that road, let's talk about our daughters. I think it's important for them. I think that they need to have strong role models. They need to see what a man really is.
Yeah.
And that will help them kind of hopefully make better choices with men that they choose to share their life with.
Yeah.
And kind of get a good glimpse of what can be, as opposed to maybe settling for what they see more often. Mike, you have any thoughts on that? D, I'll come right back to you.
Okay.
Well, I agree 100%, but I think you can even go a little beyond that and say it doesn't matter what your family dynamics are. I think the most important thing, or one of the more important things in family dynamics, is that you have those values, whatever values those are. You have those guidelines, you have those rules, you have that structure. I think that's the bigger picture. And like I've said before on your show, Dean, it all starts at home. Everything starts at home, and that and what they get from the home, they take that into the outside world. And when they do that, their behavior or their views either solidify or they crumble. So I think, like I've always preached, and I'll continue to preach, everything starts in the home.
All right, D, back to you.
My oldest is my daughter, and when she was first born, being a girl dad scared me. Being a dad in general just scared me, but specifically being a girl dad scared me. And so, I mean, I've learned a lot through this journey, but it was terrifying in the beginning. You
Talk
know?
to me. Delve a little deeper. Why? Why did it scare you?
Well, so growing up again, I had great role models. You know, my grandparents were great. You know what I'm saying? I lived with my grandparents. I saw my grandmother stay at home. She was she did daycare, and my grandfather, you know, was a supervisor in the factory. So I saw what marriage looks like. Um, but when I went out on my own, my wife and I met. You know, we got married, we got an apartment, and then our oldest came. And when she came home, I remember this like it was yesterday. She came home, my oldest daughter, and I was holding her, and she was crying, and I didn't know how to console her. I legit didn't know how to console her. Like, yeah, they teach you in the hospital do X, Y, and Z, but you get home and like this baby depending on you. So I'm like, I got nervous. So shame on me. I put my daughter down, and a couple days later, I move out. You know, I move out. I leave my wife and I leave my daughter at home, and I was terrified. You know, so when people talk about dads doing it, why I started it, because I know there's other fathers out there who also get very terrified with fatherhood and need somebody like a community to support them in that journey. Because man, it got ugly for a little bit. Like I didn't know what to do. You know, I didn't know how to be a father, and it scared me. I got this little person depending on me, and also I got my wife depending on me. I just got nervous. You know, I didn't know how to do it, and that's a real authentic conversation. You know,
So D, I'm going to stay with you, Mike. I'm going to stay with D for a second. I want to know a little bit more about that. So talk to me about. So you move out.
I move out. Yeah,
How long were you out, and what was the deciding factor to pull you back in?
I was out for some time, more than a couple months, and the deciding factor that pulled me in was when you have a family, you stay with your family. You know, when you have a family, you make it work. When you're a father, people are dependent on you. You know, there's no more of you can't do this. It's figuring this stuff out along the way. You know, so with some proper guidance, some proper information was, you know, hey, D, this is what you need to do. This is the thoughts and so forth, and it just everything started to work itself back. You know, from that standpoint. But man, there was some difficult times, you know, and again, I didn't know how to be a father. So when people say I don't know how to do these things, I totally understand where they're coming from because I was there myself. It terrified me. Terrified me. I'm not as terrified now because now I got some experience with it. You
Oh,
know?
you're a veteran of veterans at this point with five.
Yeah, yeah. I got some experience with it.
So thank you for sharing that, Mike. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I want to say, Dr. D, I appreciate you sharing that, that intimate story with us. It takes a lot to be honest and open, with,
Yeah.
particularly with folks who you may not even met before.
Yeah.
So kudos to that. To piggyback again off of what you said, um, I remember when my son was born, and I think I was a different kind of scared. I was a different kind of scared because of the way I was, my personality, as far as some folks would say I'm detached from my emotions, particularly ladies that I've dealt in the past, and even my wife to a certain extent would say that I'm detached from my emotions, and I'll openly admit that. All good. So I was so I was scared in that regard because um, I didn't know how I was going to react with my son as far as forming a bond, forming that relationship with him, connecting with him on an emotional level, and thankfully things worked out. I didn't leave the home. I stayed there and battled it out, but to your point, Dr. D, you had the wherewithal to come back home, and I think that that's the most important thing. Is that in some family dynamics, uh, one half doesn't come back home, so you had the wherewithal to do that. So kudos to you. So I can relate to you on being scared as being a new father. Absolutely terrified in the beginning, and again, a lot of it was due to who I was and the way I was raised, with a father and three brothers. There's a lot of masculinity in our household. So I didn't know how that was going to transform the fatherhood, but it worked out.
Good.
Well, let me jump in on this. Again, I thank you for sharing this because I've known you for quite some time, Dr. Phillips, and we've never had this conversation. I mean, this is obviously that's a very intimate story that you shared with us and everybody else who's watching or is going to hear this on the podcast version. I want to ask you both this: new fathers, hopefully this reaches some people that are new and the feeling that sense of being overwhelmed that we all felt. What is your message for new fathers? And as far as you know, what's going through their mind, it's going a million miles per hour. I remember my kids are a little older than both of yours. I remember that feeling of helplessness when my oldest was crying and not knowing what to do and not really knowing if I was feeding her right or if I was burping her right. You know, what the heck is a swaddle? Trying to swaddle her with a blanket. Like I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I was afraid to break her at times because, you know, it's just all that fear. So what is your advice for new fathers? I'll start with you first, D.
So through Dad's doing it, one of the cool things that I think we do is that, you know, we put different slogans and different sayings on shirts. Because as we know, when we're out in the communities, it's hard to get guys talking about anything if it's not related to sports, right? So, you know, we see a person out there wearing a, you know, let's say you're a Celtics fan and somebody's wearing a, you know, Celtics shirt or let's say New York Knicks shirt. You got to engage in a conversation about what you just saw the night before, right? In terms of a game. So one of the things that we do, we put slogans on shirts to hopefully generate conversation. And when you ask a question that you just posed, what was my advice? Dad's doing, we have a shirt that says entering fatherhood, right? And on it, on the back of it, it says any advice, right? So the hope is that if somebody is entering fatherhood, right, they buy this shirt or have the conversation, it could be another new father talking about their previous fatherhood experience and giving their experience to the person, saying, hey, this is what I just went through. This is, you know, this is my thought process. Maybe you should do it this way or look at it this way. And just have those real authentic conversations like this is what to expect. You know, I know we're all different based off our different experiences, but at the same time, it's kind of around fatherhood. So, you know, we're hopefully sharing, you know, some of the best practices, so to say, you know. So that's one of the ways that Dad's doing it is trying to approach that conversation.
All right, Mike, any advice that you would give new fathers?
I think if I was to give advice to new fathers, I think that the advice that I would give them that I feel like made a difference with me is if you have the ability to take time off of work and spend that time with your child, particularly at a young age, at the, you know, newborn child, I highly recommend that if you are able to take the time off of work and spend that time, just like mom does, spend that time with your son or daughter and bond with that child. I feel as though it has been extremely successful on my part in my situation. And you know, and folks that follow me on social media know that that my son and I have this extremely incredible bond, and I attribute that to the little things. And I say the little things is your son or daughter. And again, based upon personal experience, they don't need that expensive toy. You know what they need? They need your undivided attention. They need you to be with them in that moment when they're going through that tough time, and you can talk them through, or talk them out of certain situations. I think that is what is important, particularly at a very young age, from birth until, you know, the age of 7. That brain is still forming, it's molding, it's very pliable. So that is that time that you can really get your bang, the biggest bang.
I love that. That is fantastic advice. I'm going to throw mine in. Mine is don't feel like you have to figure it out by yourself. Put your ego aside and talk to people that have kids. Hopefully you have somebody in your circle that'll tell you, hey, listen, I went through the same thing. Don't do what I did. You know, don't do it this way. I learned through trial and error that maybe this wasn't the best way. Maybe you should try this now that I'm 3 kids deep. Demetrice is 5 kids deep. Mike, you have 1. Talk to people that are in similar circumstances, because you're going to get good advice. And I found, in my personal experience, I haven't found that anybody gives you poor advice when it comes to dealing with kids. Everybody gives you heartfelt advice. It might not be right for you, but typically, even if it's people that you don't necessarily, always agree with, typically people will give you their best possible advice for how to deal with your kids and how to cope and with what goes on and everything.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But you touch upon a couple of things, and typically, in families, people look at the male as the provider. So how do you guys balance being the provider for your family, financial provider, but also being there as a father?
Mike, you go first on this because we have very different answers. I think.
So your question is, how do we balance the time with being a father and supporting
Yeah,
the home?
financially, being the provider financially for your family, but also being, the dad that we all want to be, right? How do you balance that?
Yeah, and I think that my situation is a little different from other folks. Is that I'm fortunate enough. My wife and I both work, so financially we're okay, and we only have one as opposed to somebody who has five.
Mhm.
So my answer may be very different for somebody with under different circumstances. But for me, I think the way that I balance that is particularly at long days. Before I leave for a long day, I would tell my son, hey, listen, Dad's got to work a long day. I won't see you. I probably won't see you before you go to school. So I'm going to spend some time with you now. We'll have small talks. We'll bond in that. And again, you don't need a tremendous amount of time. Uh, you just need to be there with him or her at that particular moment, and allow him to understand why you're doing what you're doing, why you're working, why you're supporting, or you're doing what you're doing to support his future, the family's future. So if you give him some of those whys, I think your child will be receptive and understand why maybe you've missed functions or why you're not there. And my son has experienced me on several occasions when I just didn't give him the amount of time I wanted to give him because I was taking an exam. At this particular time, at this particular point in my life, I'm pursuing my master's degree, which takes up a tremendous amount of my time. Dean, I'm speaking to the choir. I know you have your master's. Dr. D, obviously, you have your doctorate. So, again, to you gentlemen, I'm speaking to the choir, but that requires a tremendous amount of time. But with that being said, the sacrifice is worth it because when your child or your children see what the effort that you're putting into it, they'll appreciate that. When you tell them, son, daughter, education is important. But how can you tell them that if they don't see you doing the same things that you're preaching to them about? So, again, I think I went off on a tangent, but that's my skill.
No, I appreciate it. I'll jump in on the same question. So in my house, I guess we're more of what you would call a traditional setup where, for me, I am the main breadwinner. And I've also went back and gotten my bachelor's degree when my first two were little, and then my master's degree. So I got my bachelor's degree at 36 and my master's at 43.
Okay.
So that was extremely difficult having to juggle being, working, because being the main income, so working all those hours, which means I'm missing a lot of things, because we all know when you work for somebody else, what are we doing? We're trading time for money.
Yeah.
Right.
Opportunity costs. Absolutely.
And that is a tough balance as a father. My father used to call it the crisis of fatherhood, because, back when it was overwhelmingly the fathers were the breadwinners in the family. He called it the crisis of fatherhood, where he just didn't have the opportunity to go to games, practices, things like that, because he was constantly working or recovering so he could go back to work. So I lived like that a little bit for a lot of my oldest daughter's childhood, a decent amount of my son's childhood, in almost my entire younger daughter's infancy and toddler, and when she was a toddler. So I have more time now, but it was because of that work I put in that allowed me to ascend to positions where I'm making I make a better wage during my 40 hours a week than I did before, where yes, I had the opportunity to make similar money, but I had to be away so much more. So it was very difficult to do that. And I just want to touch upon one more thing too, and just restate the goal. The goal of fatherhood. I know my father's goal for us was to have us ascend and do better than he did. And I know that I am certainly trying to lay the groundwork for my children to be able to do more for their families if they decide to have them, or even themselves, than what we've been able to provide for them. That would be the ultimate success, and that's my ultimate goal, is to have my kids be able to live a little bit freer and to have a little bit more of what makes them happy in their lives than I've been able to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hope I answered. Did we answer your question?
No, you did. You did. I mean, again, it's being able to strike that balance, you know. And my wife and I too. My wife, you know, she works 40 hours a week as well, you know. And we're in this together. And it's funny because, like, you know, it just comes down for me and in our marriage. It's communication, you know. And like you said, Mike, being upfront with the kids. Hey, listen, Dad has to go do X, Y, and Z. You know, one of the things I credit my grandfather for is teaching me a strong work ethic. You know, my grandfather, like he was like back in it, he's a worker. You know, had surgery on his foot, was still going to work. Didn't barely miss days of work. You know, that was that era that he grew up in. That's what they did. So I take a strong work ethic, you know, from my grandfather, and I'm learning how to do this fatherhood thing, you know, as I go along. You know, so
Yeah. And I think something else that goes into that, because I've found myself in certain situations where I've come home, and I'm exhausted. I'm extremely exhausted, and you know, the son wants to hold a conversation, or he wants.
Or read a book.
Yeah. Whatever the case is, I think it's important for parents to be mindful that they should tough it out and take that opportunity to still bond at that particular time, even though you know, and not get frustrated at the situation because you're tired, you know, whatever the case is. I think it's important to be mindful of that, because you're not going to get those moments back, and your kids are like sponges. You know, kids soak it up, and they remember those little things. And again, I really feel like the way I've invested a lot of my time and made it meaningful was just like, I literally no electronics, no TV, no book, just sit down and have a conversation. You know, just sit down and talk. Just sit down and be with that child at that particular moment. And I'm telling you, I feel as though it's worked wonders for my son, our relationship. And I encourage all new parents, or not even new parents, but just parents in general, to soak that in and to really actively be involved in listening to your son or daughter when they're trying to have a conversation with you and be with you in that moment.
yeah, absolutely.
So, gentlemen, believe it or not, we're almost up on the half hour here. So I just want to throw it out like to this, Mike. I envy your ability to do what you've done with your son. I think what you've done, it comes from a couple things. It comes from maturity, you know, being maybe a little older when you decided to have your son. I think that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you were in a better place financially than a lot of people were. And that's all, again, that's part of maturity, making sure that you are ready, or as ready as possible,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to, you know, do what needs to be done in order to have a stable environment for your children to not just to be able to exist, but to be able to thrive. So kudos on that. So Dr. D, want to go to you for the last word. Any last word, any projects, anything else? How can we follow you on Dad's Doing It?
Absolutely. So Dad's Doing is in the process of launching our website. It should be up in about a week and a half or so. Just waiting, putting on the finishing touches on it. And you can always hit me on Facebook, Dad's Doing It, and also Instagram and Twitter, Dad's Doing It. The whole goal of this is just to create a conversation amongst fathers about how can we best tackle fatherhood, right? And I'm hoping to reach those fathers who were similar to me at that time, where they didn't know, whether to leave or stay or whatever. I want to speak to those fathers, right? And create that conversation of positivity and look forward to fatherhood and tackle this journey together. So everything I do is about creating, getting that message out there. Hey, dads being dads, but let's talk about this as we go.
Awesome. I just want to ask one question. Is there a potential for mentorship for young and new fathers?
Yes, it's in the works. That's in the works. Absolutely.
All right, folks.
Works.
Well, you heard it from the man. Dad's doing it. Check it out. It's a great concept, and us, his friends at Supply the Y, we fully support that project. Mike, what's going on with you?
So, right now I'm just focused on education, trying to get where you gentlemen are, which is taking a lot of my time aside from my full-time job. So that's what I'm focused on, one goal at a time. I think what I would like to leave folks with is this, and this is very, very important for everyone, is modeling the behavior you expect in them. So as parents, as adults, you need to model the behavior that you expect in young people. You need to model the behavior that you expect in your son or your daughter, because it matters. And I'll leave you with that.
Mike, profound words. I'm going to leave you with some unsolicited advice, Mike, and it's based on what you and Dr. D have mentioned throughout the entirety of the show. I encourage you, and Dr. D, you tell me if you disagree with this, when you graduate, that you go to the graduation, you participate fully. If you earn any regalia, you wear that regalia. Anything that you can do to commemorate that moment, because you never know what that's going to mean to your son as time passes on. And as evidence of this, I don't know if either one of you follow my personal Instagram. My oldest daughter, just out of the blue, shared a picture of her and I on the day that I received my bachelor's degree. Just out of the blue. It wasn't a conversation, anything.
She remembered it, huh?
But that's the importance of making sure. That's why we do this. Like you said, we want to set the example, right? We want to set the bar high. I think one thing that we haven't been doing enough of as fathers in general is I don't think that we set the expectations for our kids high enough. Yeah. If we set the bar too low, then that becomes what they expect of themselves. Yeah. We have to start expecting excellence of our children, demanding excellence of our children. And to Mike's point, we have to embody that in our actions. So, Mike, when you get your degree, make sure that you take part in all the festivities that you can, and make sure that you involve your son in all of that, because it'll be profound down the line. Go ahead, Mike. Anybody?
Nope, that was it. That was it. I appreciate again. I appreciate you having me back on, Dean. It's always a pleasure, and welcome to the show, Dr. D.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it, and Dean as well. I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to being on again very soon.
All right, fellas. Thank you so much, everybody. That's going to do it for us here tonight. It's been another great episode of Difficult Conversations. A little bit different twist than what we normally do, but we're hoping that when you reshare this episode and it finds its way to the people that need to hear this message, that this changes somebody's lives. So again, please like this, please share it. And if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out to us, hit me up at Supply the Y, and I'll make the appropriate connections. So that's going to do it tonight, folks. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, #Supply the Y. Take care.